I went through all the little cobble streets that are still in Avignon. It's just, I say, oh, I'm going to turn right and I'm going to see that, and it comes back to me. But say that now I have nostalgia to go back and see it again. No, I don't. But in my head, I have many pictures of Avignon.
So tell me about when your mother died.
Well, my mother was sick with tuberculosis, and she died in '46, so that was just at the end of the war. So she was in a sanatorium in the south of France, not far from Nice. And at Nice, my aunt was living in Nice. My aunt, who was my mother's younger sister. And well, no, I don't want to talk to you about that. I'm going to. It's very painful. Because my mother, she died in the sanatorium, but there was. My father wanted her remains, her corpse, to be brought back to Avignon so she could be buried in the family plot in Avignon. So my father rented an ambulance that took us from where my mother had died next to Nice back to Avignon, and my mother, there was a law, you couldn't carry corpses, but she had just died, so the pretense was that she was just very sick. And so we went to Avignon next to my mother's corpse in this ambulance.
And you rode in the back?
Yeah. It seems to me that somehow it was arranged in such a way that my mother was lying there and my father was in front of me.
How long was the journey?
Oh, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 hours. And then in Avignon, well then she was put in the house on the bed like the tradition is, and the people, all the friends and all, they came to the house to view her, to view the body.
What were you doing?
Well, I was just there mingling, telling people to come in, and probably crying all the way. And the telephone was not, we didn't have the telephone. There was a telephone downstairs in the shop, but now it seems simple, you call people and say, my mother died or something, but it was by word of mouth that all these was known, or by letters, but that took a day or two.
How did he bury her? Or did you bury her?
Yeah.
What do you remember about that?
Yeah. Well, in France the tradition was, and probably may still be, that's when somebody like this dies, first of all the entrance to the house is draped with black things, black drapes. And there is always a little table so people can come and sign. And then from that place, it was horse-drawn. It was horse-drawn. There was big shortage of oil. It was not a taxi or anything like that. But anyway, with the body, and then people following, walking to the cemetery. This is how things are done, going through the city in this horse-drawn carriage where the body is placed. No, I don't suppose it is done anymore. Yeah, there is too much traffic in Avignon, but in those days there were very few cars. So that's how we took her to the cemetery, and then there is a plot. I think if I went to the cemetery in France, in the same one, I would find the family plot right away.
What do you remember about your brother and sister?
My brother and sister, well, very close family. My brother was really a very exceptional man. He died very young, as you know. And being 4 years older than I am, he was there, the big brother, knowing always more than I did, and succeeding in everything he undertook.
Did he comfort you on that day?
I knew he liked me very much, but not anything sentimental. Well, he did fight for me to go to college. That he did.
But on the day that your mother died, did he comfort you a lot?
No, I can't remember that. I remember comforting my sister because she was very young. I was an adult already, I was 20. But my sister was a little girl, and that she's the one who needed.
Did you get a chance to say goodbye to your mother?
No, she had died. She had died in the sanatorium a few hours before my father and I arrived. But I had seen her a month before. I remember I helped her take a bed bath. And I remember saying to myself, boy, she's so emaciated. I knew, I felt she was not going to live very long. Although it's so hard to imagine that your parents are going to disappear. It's unbearable. For years and years I couldn't talk about her without sobbing. And my sister Françoise, very often, she said, talk to me about Maman. Tell me all you remember, because she remembers so little. All the more than the last few years, my mother was so afraid to pass her the germs of tuberculosis that she avoided touching her, And it took a long time for Françoise to accept that. And I told her so many times that I remember my mother telling me that it was so hard for her because she loved that little girl so much, but she just couldn't. Because, 2 days you would just take some antibacterial soap maybe, but there was a great fear of transmitting tuberculosis particularly. And I knew that for my mother, one day she told me that, and I told Françoise many times, she told me, I know I'm going to die, and your brother and you are adults, and you will do fine. But I'm particularly worried about Françoise. So I always felt an obligation, which was not an obligation because I adore this little girl. So, but I did.
Pressure?
No, not pressure, but a solemn duty, if you like, to take care of her.
So what happened after that? After 46?
Well, boy, I was going to forget that. In October 45, I think, I was in church on Sunday morning, and suddenly I felt tremendous thumping in my head. But totally, beyond migraine, something. And I remember I do remember that so clearly. Standing up, leaving the church, and having one thought in mind, I've got to go home. And my home was not very far, but I had to walk quite a bit. And I managed, but I remember that it was very difficult to walk. I had the feeling that the streets were disappearing under me. But anyway, I made it to the house, and I remember I rang the bell downstairs and I stayed there because I knew I was going to collapse. My father was in the house and he came, he opened the door and he got me in his arm because I just, and put me on the bed. And then I started vomiting, which I understood later on was, you vomit when you have something happening in your head. You just. So immediately he went downstairs, he called the doctors. My mother was, I think my mother was in the house. And I had two doctors by my bedside, very short, and they said I had a brain hemorrhage. Later on, much later after I recovered, it took me a very long time to recover from that. Later on, they said it was a polioencephalitis. That's the name they gave it. Anyway, there was a capillary or something that snapped somewhere in my brain, and and so there was blood in the artery or the vein you have in the spine there, because there was a leak. And this is how I had a lumbar puncture, and this is how they knew for sure what had happened to me. Well, by having ice on my head and being in bed, slowly after a few days, the tremendous headache just slowed down. But I know that in that period I learned it through French, and everybody was expecting me to die. But I didn't. I couldn't speak for a few days. I stammered. I was lying in bed like this with, ice on my head and always somebody next to me. But my uncle and my aunts and all that, they all came to spend 2 or 3 hours, so I would never be alone.
But you recovered?
I recovered, but it took a very long time for me to completely recuperate. And to this day, when I go downstairs for some exercise, I cannot walk on the thread mirror without holding on something, because I never regain complete balance from that day.
Do you have any old photos?
Although in those days, you took a picture, you had those black and white. My brother got one of those square appareil photo camera, and it was a big thing to take a photo. It had to be.
So tell me about your first marriage.
Oh, well, you are touching in them. Well, the fact is that during those years there, I went to school, I went to college, and I became pregnant in 1951, and not knowing that all these things were totally unacceptable for my father and all that, I took refuge in a school in the south of France that had been founded by some ex-teacher of mine who were. So anyway, I stayed there and I taught, and when Stéphane was born in Marseille, that's where he was brought up, the first 2 or 3 years of his life. Then my father relented, and then I was able to see him, and his wife, my stepmother, he had remarried. And then for a long time they had forbidden me to see Françoise, as a bad influence I could be on her. And then, Stéphane was a lovely little boy, and he finally won everybody over, and I was forgiven somehow. My horrible conduct. So there was, and in order for Stefan to have the name of his father, there was a whole rigmarole. I was in France, and his father was in America, and so we had a sort of proxy marriage so that I could get the name. So it had to be done through the embassy, and it was quite complicated.
Wait, Stephen's father was an American?
Mm-hmm.
What was he doing in Marseille?
No, it was not in Marseille that I met him. It was in Austria, where I was learning German during that summer.
He was just traveling?
Hmm?
He was traveling?
No, he was also at this summer university.
Mm.
So for all these transactions, finally, Stephen was given the name of his father for Quinby was the name, Quinby. And after it was understood that we'd get married, and then that I wasn't going to come to the States, so he wasn't going to go to France, but with the same transaction we would get a divorce, so that, he was, so this is what happened. But enough to give the name to the child. And then later on Steve married him, Steve adopted him officially, so he became Olmsted, but that was not the name he had for a few years.
So how did you meet Steve?
Well, that summer where I was with the father of Stefan, I also met Steve, because we both liked mountain climbing, and we went hiking together a few times.
Where?
Hmm?
Where?
Well, we were in Austria, so we went to the different hikes that were organized every day for these, people who like that. So this is how I met him. Then
at the same time,
yeah, that's right. So
you're
Steve
a popular
was
girl.
a good friend. Yeah. Oh. No, but there was absolutely nothing with Steve except that a few months, not even a few months later. Steve. After that, Steve was supposed to go back to America, but he had spent the money for his return ticket, so he went to Marseille. Since he had been in the Navy, he went and he worked on a few ships, or on a ship, I don't know. He knew all the ropes of being a sailor. And I met him in the streets of Marseille by sheer coincidence. We were on the same sidewalk, and we had spent some time in the summer, and so I remember that at the time I was expecting Stefan, so I wanted him to know, because I felt he would be a good friend. This is what happened. We met in the afternoon, because I was going to France for lunch when I met him on the sidewalk. So we met in one of the cafes in Marseille, and then I told him. And he's the one who arranged me to marry.
How did he react?
Just very lovingly, stayed with me, comforted me, he told me it would be okay, I don't know. We corresponded for 2 or 3 years before he came back from, when he went back to the States, he was sent by the company he worked for to Panama. And then he came back to France, while Stefan was already 2 or 2.5.
Well, what was your first impression of Steve? Do you remember seeing him and talking to him for the first time?
Yeah, well, he was, I just felt that, he behaved like he was coming in a time of crisis in my life, and he would protect me, he would help me, which he did, really. Which he did. And then we corresponded for a long time. And then he came back to Europe. And then that clicked. We decided to get married. And he...
You say we decided. He didn't. Did he ask you?
Well, I do remember that we were walking in that big garden in Montpellier. Stéphane holding my hand. I can't remember exactly how it went. It was sort of, it goes without saying, you know, we are going to get married. And then he was sent to Chile, and this, I went to Chile with Stéphane, and we got married when I arrived in Chile. Could we have a cup of coffee or something?